9 years ago, today's guest wrote the following words. For most of my adult life, I traveled a safe path. I lingered at the intersection,
peering deep into my future, and contemplated the choice between the secure and the uncertain, between the creative and the logical, even though I wanted what my best friend once referred to as the whole wide world. I thought it was prudent to compromise. I told myself it was more sensible to aspire for success that was realistically attainable, perhaps even failure-proof. It never once occurred to me that I could succeed at what I dreamed of. I recommend the following course of action for those who are starting out or who, like me, are reconfiguring midway through. Do what you love, and don't stop until you get what you love.
You can start to create a career that you love right now.
Not 20 years from now, not 30 years from now, not 2 weeks from now. Now.
She didn't write it with me in mind, but it sure feels that way. 9 years later, I'm hoping it's just what you need to hear. Hello and welcome to 1% Better. I'm your host, Joe Ferraro, and this is a podcast obsessed with helping people improve in small, consistent ways every day. You can find me on Twitter at FerraroOnAir, and you can find this podcast wherever podcasts are free. Today's guest is one of the most creative people I've ever met, but rather than pretend that this is a gift, she shares actionable, practical steps that she took to get there. Today, on 1% Better, it's Debbie Millman.
Thank you, Joe. It's really wonderful to be here.
Much of my audience undoubtedly will know your work, but what do you do?
Oh, it's a tough question. I do a lot of different things at the same time. So I am the host of Design Matters, which is a podcast that I started 12 years ago, a little over 12 years ago at this point. I am also the chair of the Masters in Branding program at the School of Visual Arts in New York City, and I am also the editorial and creative director of Print Magazine.
That keeps you busy. And as we see you now and I look into your work, it seems as though that you have just ultra confidence, but you've been very open about your work in the past and that struggle for confidence. One of the things that I've loved reading about is your relationship between courage and confidence. I wonder if you could speak about that a bit.
Sure. First of all, it's always amazing to me when anyone suggests that I have confidence. I don't know that I do. I just have a deep longing to do things that is bigger than my fear of doing them. Actually, I think my fear of not doing them is bigger than anything. Well, this is something that I talked to Dani Shapiro about. She's a writer, and she was on my show a couple of years ago. And after the episode was finished, so unfortunately this was not immortalized in tape, we happened to be talking about the plethora of books that had come out on confidence in that time frame. And so we were talking about confidence, and she said that she thought that confidence was highly overrated, and that immediately piqued my interest. And I asked her why, and she said that she felt that most really confident, like overly confident or apparently confident or sort of happily confident people were somewhat annoying, and that she thought that what was more important than confidence was courage. And I've been thinking about that ever since quite a lot, and I talk about it all the time. And so I have done a bit of research into what actually gives people a sense of confidence. And so what I've discovered is that you don't just get confidence. You don't earn confidence like a paycheck. You don't go and buy confidence like a perfume. You actually are able to manifest confidence after the successful, repeated endeavor. So, for example, if you start something for the first time, you've never done it before, it makes sense that you wouldn't have confidence doing it because you've never done it before. So you don't know what the outcome is going to be. And if you don't know what the outcome is going to be, most of us experience that part of our brain, the reptilian part of our brain, go off because we don't know what the outcome is going to be. Therefore, we're nervous and feeling vulnerable. If you do something a number of times, you tend to get better at it. Most people that do things over and over tend to get better at those things. So in order to develop confidence, you need to have some repeated success at any endeavor. Any endeavor that you do over and over again and get better and better at, you will manifest confidence. So I use driving as the best example. The first time you drive a car, the first time you get it behind the wheel, you're incredibly nervous. You've never done it before. You're having to wield control over this giant instrument, this machine, and it could be really potentially dangerous. Then you learn how to drive and you become less nervous. You get your license and you become even less nervous. And 5, 10, 15, 20, 30, 40 years later, you're not getting into a car and thinking every time you turn on the ignition that you have to manifest this confidence. You have car confidence. You know how to drive. And so I think that that is the best example of, I think, how confidence is manifested. It is the successful repetition of any endeavor. The more you do it, the better you get, the more likely you are to feel really good about doing it again.
Wow, it's well said. And then how do you see that looking in art and design, where so often you're not sure what the reception will be? You're not sure if it was quote unquote successful.
Really good question. So design and art are both really subjective experiences. There are people that love Basquiat. There are people that think that their kid could do that work. There are people that love Jackson Pollock, and same thing. Other people who will say, oh, my kid could have done that. And Dali and any number of provocative, polarizing artists. So there really is a subjectivity that we bring to most experiences. It's based on our upbringing, our parenting, our view of the world, our view of ourselves in the world. But in particular with art or any non-scientific experience where you know whether something is right or wrong and therefore good or bad, you often are feeling something. And that feeling is what gives you the sense that something is good or bad. It makes you feel more connected, or it provokes an emotion in you. And if the design that you've created provokes the experience or the reaction or the response that you want people to have, then I would suggest that that was probably a successful endeavor. Now, that doesn't always mean that whatever design you create that creates a certain response in people doesn't always mean that you're going to get the ultimate result. And I'm thinking about the election. You know, I loved Michael Beirut's logo for Hillary Clinton. A lot of people really liked it. Didn't necessarily get us the response that we wanted.
No, it didn't. How do you exercise that muscle to continue to look at the world in a certain way, to continue to put out design that you're proud of?
You just have to keep doing it. You have to do it as often as possible, if not every day. And you will get better by the sheer virtue of understanding the way in which you do something and what you bring to it and why you do it, your motivation. And you also are able to connect things, I think, more quickly if you are adept at thinking about it or immersed in thinking about it on a regular basis.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then it kind of most comes out clearly if you're thinking about art, and specifically art and design. But a lot of the listeners to this show will be leaders that are teachers like yourself, coaches even. How do you see the connection to the teaching profession when it comes to design?
Well, I'm really fortunate in that I teach in an environment where the leadership of the college, the School of Visual Arts, is insistent that the faculty be working professionals. So we're not lifelong academics, and there's always a place for that type of learning and that type of experience. But SVA is an organization that employs people that are working professionals to be able to do two things, to be able to not only teach the practical application of design, but also teach the practical application of working in the field of design.
That makes sense. And what fears do you see your students coming to you with?
I think that a lot of the same fears that I experienced when I was in school and first graduating. Am I going to be able to have a meaningful life? Am I going to be able to do what I want? Am I going to be able to get a good job? Or what do I want? Forgetting, am I going to be able to do what I want? But what actually do I want to do? Am I good enough? Am I smart enough? Am I capable enough? Am I networked enough? Am I enough?
Yeah, and that's definitely something that we all feel. One of the tools that I've read you talk about beautifully is the 10-year plan. I wonder if you would be able to share that here.
Well, this is something that I modified from Milton Glaser. Now, so between talking about what I'm modifying from Milton Glaser and what I'm modifying from Dani Shapiro, I'm afraid your listener is going to think, does she have an original thought? But I'll let them decide. So Milton Glaser is somebody who's had a profound influence on me. And I took a class with him in 2005. I took a summer intensive at the School of Visual Arts. This is before I was teaching there. And it was a class that he taught for mid-career designers in an effort to help you sort of reboot your energy and your inspiration and motivation. And I had been feeling kind of stuck at that time. It was about 3 or 4 months into my starting the podcast, and I didn't know what the heck I was doing. And just in general with my career, I'd felt that I was in a bit of a creative desert. And that's one of the reasons I started Design Matters, but I wasn't actually experiencing any of the creative inspiration that I do now with it because I was so new at it and so bad at it. But in any case, I took this class with him, and he doesn't teach it anymore, which is unfortunate. But one of the things that he had asked the students in the classes that he was teaching, and he taught this for decades, was that whatever happened in Milton's class stayed in Milton's class. There was a bit of a Fight Club pact that you didn't share what the journey was through the class because it could influence how somebody else took the class in the future. Because he doesn't teach the class anymore, I am trying as much as I can to continue some of what he taught me because it was so life-changing, altering in every way. Well, the final exercise he gave us was to write our future selves, right as our future selves, 5 years into the future, with a recap of the day, 5 years into the future, of what we would describe as a perfect day. And it had to be as detailed as possible. What time did you wake up? Where did you wake up? Who did you wake up with? What was it like outside? What kind of bed are you sleeping in? What kind of sheets do you have? What do you eat for breakfast? Where and how do you go to work? What do you do? Every single detail that you can imagine, and write as if your life depends on it. And he let us know that this type of exercise he found to be incredibly powerful, and was often hearing from his students from the past after 5 years, and they would write and say, Milton, everything came true, or nearly everything came true. And I did this exercise, and I not only did the exercise, but I wrote a list of 12 things on that I wanted to come true. So what would it be specifically, in addition to the day, in addition to all these things that I was doing during the day, what did I want to accomplish in that 5 years? And I took it really seriously. And within 1 year, I would say maybe 20% came true. Within 5 years, 80% came true. And I think in the, now 12 years later, I think the 12th thing is coming true.
Wow.
So it's pretty amazing. So I talked about this on Tim Ferriss's show, and he has a huge, amazing audience. And so one of his listeners made a website called Your 10 10-yearlifeplan.com. I think that's what it is. Oh, I changed it to 10 years because I felt that it was nice to have a little bit more runway. And a lot of the people that I'm teaching are in their 20s and 30s and have a little bit more time. I was in my 40s when I took the class. So I want to give people a little bit more of a bit more of a runway.
Yeah, I think that website's your10yearplan.com. Beautiful, generous gift that person did, for sure.
I know. Isn't it amazing?
It is. And then I did the exercise, and it was absolutely intimidating, scary, exhilarating. I had a physical reaction to it where I'm a very happy person. I'm doing a lot of the things I love. And yet when I was doing it, I felt my throat closing up a bit. I felt someone was looking over my shoulder. I was exhilarated. I was excited. I wanted to get started, and I was afraid. I wonder if you've heard any of those symptoms before.
Yes, absolutely. I have this in front of me because my anniversary of writing the essay is August 4th.
Wow.
And so I want to write another one on August 4th. And so I'm just going to read you some of these things that I'm doing 2010. Graphic poetry book, graphic poetry gallery exhibit, Design Matters book, Design Matters, period, to continue to be doing it, AIGA National, print, teaching, corporate work, poetry. Okay, so those are some of the things that I wrote. Now, some of those things I could do without anybody's permission or buy-in or ability to make something happen for me, like poetry.
Yeah.
But at that point, I had no books. I was not teaching. I was not part of any kind of national AIGA. So I published my first poetry book, graphic poetry book, in 2009. I'm working on a graphic poetry or graphic imagery exhibit right now at the Museum of Design in Atlanta, my own curation at that museum. So there you have that. I did my Design Matters-esque book, How to Think Like a Great Graphic Designer, in 2007. I went on the AIGA National Board in 2006, and then became president in 2009. I'm now the editorial and creative director at Print Magazine, and I'm teaching at the School of Visual Arts. Now, all of those things were these gigantic, big hopes, dreams, and wishes. I'm doing them. I'm actually doing them all. Is that unbelievable?
I'm sitting here with chills, and I'm thinking you use the permission word. Do you think that has a part of it? Are you saying that by doing the exercise, we give ourselves a form of mental permission?
I think it's about a declaration, about acknowledging that you want something and then putting it out there as a real, tangible possibility.
That's what I found with the details, right? When you talk about the smell of the coffee in the house and the sheets, and it becomes, you trick the mind into thinking that it's possible.
Yeah.
And somehow it is.
Things have always taken longer for me for some reason. I'm a person that it takes a long time for things to happen for me. My career didn't really take off until about 12 or 13 or 14 years into my career. So for me, that 5 years, extending it to 10 or 12, for me just feels like, oh, that's apropos for my life. But to now be looking at that list as I near, and I don't really look at this list. I look at it once a year on August 4th. I happen to have it on my desk because it's there and waiting for August 4th. And because now I'm sitting at my desk and we're doing the interview, I picked it up to look at it. And every time I look at it every year, I'm amazed because these were things, Joe, that I was longing for, that I was so desperate to have, that I wanted so badly and had no way of knowing how to manifest them. And all I could do was put them on a list and hope that they would happen. And then boom, 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 boom. It's magic. And it's all thanks to Milton.
And thanks to you for being so generous to share it. One of the things I've noticed over and over in your work is just this abundant, almost incomprehensible generosity. Is that something that you do? It has to be something you do on purpose, I imagine. I guess the better question is, why are you so generous? And please don't stop. Why are you so generous with these life wisdoms that you've been able to kind of accrue? Because
people have been that way with me. I mean, I am so lucky to have found people like Milton Glaser who, I'm sure he's not thinking about me, but I have been thinking about him for a really long time, then had this opportunity to take this class with him and then have an opportunity to have my life changed because of him. Stephen Heller is somebody who's been extraordinary to me, who has been more generous with me, to me, than anybody else in my life. So, I feel incredibly lucky. Maria Popova, another person who's been incredibly, incredibly generous with me and so giving and so kind. And so my feeling is if people are going to be that way with me, I have to do it back.
Yeah, Stephen Heller's name came up again and again when I was reading and enjoying your work. So I said, let's reach out to Stephen and see if he has anything to say about Debbie. And
oh, my God. Really?
Absolutely. And in a last minute, late at night show of equal generosity, I asked Stephen for a comment, and he said, Debbie Millman is in truth the true master of ceremonies for the design profession as both probing interviewer and eloquent spokesperson. What a melodious voice, too.
Oh, my Steve. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, you know what it is? It's the first of all, that's touching. But you know what's just amazing is that Stephen, true to form, reached out to me, someone who gave myself permission on July 1st to launch a podcast. And I'm talking to Debbie Millman. It's very touching. I mean, and I think that there is something about this giving and receiving.
Well, I appreciate that. And I do think it's true. I mean, I started my podcast the same way that you're starting yours. I wrote to people. First, I interviewed some people that I knew in my close circle. And then I started to branch out. And then I was inviting people that I didn't know and sending emails that terrified me and expecting either outright rejection or people just ignoring me. And people were really warm and open and genuine and willing. And so I feel that if people are going to be that way with me, then I must be that way as well.
Absolutely, and thank you so much for that. One of the things you said along those lines, somewhere in your work, you had this line that was beautiful. You said 80% of people give up after the second try. Do you still believe that? And what do you mean by that?
Well, again, it was a quote.
Yeah. Well, you're very quotable.
It was a quote that I was of somebody else's, and it might have been Zig Ziglar or Harry Beckwith or one of those totally inspiring dudes.
Well, it's one thing I'm sorry to interrupt. It's one thing for it to be a moving, emotional quote. It's another thing and a skill that you've acquired to kind of curate these things that have informed your work, I would think.
Yeah, I mean, I know that very few things have happened to me on the first go around, the first try. Most have had failures or rejections associated with them. And I see that I spent a lot of time in my 20s and 30s trying something once and then being rejected and giving it up. And it never really occurred to me that I should try another methodology or try a different school or try a different approach or just ask again or just stick around. And I regret that. And so I think that the more I can share that knowledge with others, now that I've been through all of that, I think that it's only going to help other people try to persevere. But, even when it comes to regret at the moment, and this is something I learned from Seth Godin, I think I might have asked him the sort of question du jour, which everybody's been asking, which is, what would you tell your 30-year-old self? And he, of course, had the best answer, which was, I would tell my 30-year-old self nothing, because then if I did anything to change where I was going, I wouldn't be here. And so... Isn't there a Star Trek episode about that?
There is, and anything that Seth says, it makes you reevaluate, right? You start and say, "Wow, that's what I should have said."
Yeah, absolutely. And yet another person who I called out of the blue, who I interviewed on Design Matters, who I interviewed for Brand Thinking, who had no reason to say yes to this sort of New York girl who was asking for things, and yet he did, and he's been amazing.
No doubt. I turn a lot of our listeners on to Seth and even get teased a little bit of my obsession. I'm sure that'll be coming after this episode as well. I would like to talk a bit about risk.
Sure.
again, somewhere where I read so much of your work in preparation for our talk that it's difficult to tell where things are from. But one of the things that, again, really made me think is that you kind of talked about the idea that a life with risk is really the only way to go. And it struck me that that's just not how most people approach it. So I do think there is another way to go, to play it safe, to play it right down the middle. But I think you and I, as we talk, know that that's not where the fruit is. So how do you recommend people make that reconciling in their mind where they know in their heart that risk is where it's at, but it's just so easy to play it safe?
Well, it's not safe. It's settling. It's settling because, yes, it might feel safe, but what kind of safety is there in something that isn't filling your heart with joy or making you feel alive? And I think that settling is the most dangerous experience we could have, because it means that you have a vision for something more, but aren't able to reach for it. And if safety is your lead gene, and I understand that because for me it was for a very, very long time, then I would suggest that you examine why you need to feel safe, or what is it that you need in order to be safe. Because what I can tell you, as somebody that spent the first couple of decades of my adult life with a lead gene of safety, with a lead gene of wanting self-sufficiency so that I would not be harmed, what I can tell you is that if you have a sense of being vulnerable to harm, it doesn't matter what you build around yourself, you will still feel that. And so there's a difference between being safe and settling. And if you're settling in an effort to be safe, I'm wondering what that is really about. Why do you feel like you need to be safe? What does that safety entail for you? Why do you feel vulnerable? If you're settling because you're afraid, as one of my students once told me, that if you go for what you want and don't get it, you will die of heartbreak, then I would suggest that you ask yourself, what is worse, dying of heartbreak or dying of regret? Because I do believe that if we do try for something and we don't get it, there's always an opportunity to try again, to change the methodology, to change your approach, to change your attitude. But if you don't do something, then you will never be able to get out of the regret. Regret is regret. There is no other way of experiencing regret other than it being a life-depleting energy.
Do you have a set of practices that allow you to have that radar when you're entering a zone where you feel like you might be settling?
A good shrink.
Yeah, that helps.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I'm constantly concerned that I am lying to myself, that I'm being delusional about what I want or what I need or who I am or what I can be or what's possible. I mean, the older that you get, the more terrified, or at least I'm not going to say you, I'm going to say the older I get, the more terrified I'm getting about not fulfilling my life's purpose or my life's potential. And that's why when Chase Jarvis interviewed me, I said, if not now, when? And that's what he titled the podcast that we did, the title of the episode. Because how much more time do you wait before you do something that you really want to do?
When I look at your website, debbiemillman.com, it's just not only a beautiful website, but there's a body of work there that someone who's listening to the show is going to be, I hope, not envious. On the show, we talk about mudita, a Sanskrit word for vicarious joy for another. I hope they feel that. But there's that inevitable, oh my goodness, look at all that she's accomplished. When you look at it, are you saying that there's still a longing and there's still self-criticism?
Every single day.
Wow.
Every single day. First of all, that's an old website. Armin Vitt did a gorgeous job on that website for me. Armin Vitt is the founder of Brand New and the founder of the late great Speak Up. And he designed that for me. And he's actually in the process of redesigning it because there's a lot of things on there that are things that I'm not doing anymore and things that I am doing that aren't there. So watch that space. But no, I wake up every day thinking about not wasting time, about trying to live with purpose, and hoping that I can do something meaningful.
That's so important for our listeners to hear because we've all accomplished something, and there's just so much more to do. And to hear that you still have those fears is very, very reassuring. Are these the kind of things you try to share with your students, that you'll never quite be satisfied, but you don't want to have the pain of regret?
Yes. Oh, yes. I mean, I think that's the most important thing to recognize in yourself. And it was something that I actually think that settling was part of the reason that I failed and was rejected in the things that I was doing, because I was settling in things that I didn't even, or I was being rejected in things that I didn't even really want. And so I say this to anybody that will listen. All work is hard. Working at McDonald's is hard. Working at Starbucks is hard. Working as a nanny is hard. Everything is hard. If you have to work hard, you might as well do something you love while you're working hard. Because otherwise, what's the point?
Beautifully said. What's next for Debbie Millman?
Well, I have a couple of new books that I'm thinking about writing. I have an amazing, amazing, amazing season of Design Matters coming up. So this will be my 13th season. And I have Thomas Kail, who's the director of Hamilton, is going to be on the show. Marina Abramovich is going to be on the show. Naomi Klein. Mike Mills. I just can't even believe that I'm saying these names out loud in relation to being on Design Matters.
Well, I can hear your smile from here.
So, yeah, I have an amazing, amazing season coming up. And I have a show opening at the Museum of Design in Atlanta that I curated. And it's called Text Me, How We Live in Language. And it is featuring 60 artists and designers that have all contributed work that has some type of typographic influence or component.
I wonder if I could ask you to read something before you leave.
Absolutely.
If you would, I know it's been adapted in different places, but the piece Failsafe from Look Both Ways, and it's also, I think you did part of it at San Jose State.
Yes. This is an essay. Actually, it started at the first incarnation of this came in Steve Heller's book, Design Failures, wherein he asked us all to write about design failures. And I kept working on it and adapted it for the San Jose State commencement address that I gave several years ago, and then have been reworking it a little bit here and there. I did a graphic film with this as the voiceover, and so here it is now. It's called Failsafe. For most of my adult life, I traveled a safe path. I remember in vivid detail the moment I began my journey, August 1983, the hot, muggy summer of David Bowie's Modern Love and Synchronicity by The Police. A few months after I graduated college, I stood on the corner of 7th Avenue and Bleecker Street in New York City, wearing pastel blue trousers, a hot pink V-neck T-shirt, and bright white Capezio Oxfords. I lingered at the intersection, peering deep into my future, and contemplated the choice between the secure and the uncertain, between the creative and the logical, between the known and the unknown. I dreamed of being a successful artist, but inasmuch as I knew what I wanted, I felt compelled to consider what was reasonable in order to ensure my economic security. Even though I wanted what my best friend once referred to as the whole wide world, I thought it was prudent to compromise. I told myself it was more sensible to aspire for success that was realistically attainable, perhaps even failure-proof. It never once occurred to me that I could succeed at what I dreamed of. As I look back on this decision nearly 30 years later, I try to soothe myself with this rationale. I grew up in an atmosphere of emotional and financial disarray, so my impulse as a young woman was to be tenaciously self-sufficient. As a result, I lived within a fairly fixed set of possibilities for decades. I wasn't an accomplished artist. I was a brand consultant. I didn't work alone painting canvases and sculpting clay in a cold and quiet studio. I worked in a bustling office building, creating logos for fast food restaurants and packaging for mass market soft drinks, salty snacks, and over-the-counter pharmaceuticals. Most days I considered myself incredibly lucky that I had a fun, steady job and a good paycheck. But I knew deep in my heart that I settled. I chose security and stability over artistic and emotional freedom. And I can't help but wonder what my life would be like if I had made different decisions back on that balmy night in the West Village. I'll never know. You see, I've come to a realization over the years. I'm not the only person who has made these kinds of choices, not by a long shot. I discovered these common self-imposed restrictions are rather insidious, though they start out simple enough. We begin by worrying that we aren't good enough, that we aren't smart enough, or talented enough to get what we want. And then we voluntarily live in this paralyzing mental framework rather than confront our own role in this self-fulfilling paralysis. Just the possibility of failing turns into something self-fulfilling. We begin to believe that these personal restrictions are in fact fixed limitations of the world. We go on to live our lives all the while wondering what we can change and how we can change it. And we calculate and recalculate when we'll be ready to do the things that we really want to do. And we dream. If only, one day, someday. But every once in a while, often when we least expect it, we encounter someone more courageous, someone who chose to strive for that which seemed to us unrealistically attainable, even elusive. And we marvel, we swoon, we gape. Often we are in awe. I think we look at these people as lucky when in fact luck has nothing to do with it. It is really about the strength of their imagination. It is about how they constructed the possibilities for their life. In short, unlike me, they didn't determine what was impossible before it was even possible. John Maida once explained the computer will do anything within its abilities, but it will do absolutely nothing unless commanded to do so. I think that people are the same. We like to operate within our abilities, but whereas the computer has a fixed code, our abilities are limited only by our perceptions. 3 decades since determining my code, I began to rewrite the possibilities of what could come next. So far, the results have surprised me. Sometimes they scare me. Sometimes they baffle me. Most times, I'm just glad that I'm feeling something real. But you know what? There hasn't been 1 minute during this time that I haven't wished I started sooner. I really don't know what I was waiting for. The grand scheme of a life, maybe, just maybe, is not about knowing or not knowing. Perhaps what is truly known can't be described or articulated by creativity or logic, science or art. Perhaps it can be expressed by the most authentic and meaningful combination of the two, poetry. As Robert Frost once wrote, a poem begins as a lump in the throat, a sense of wrong, a homesickness, a lovesickness. It is never a thought to begin with. I recommend the following course of action for those who are starting out or who, like me, are reconfiguring midway through. Heed the words of Robert Frost. Start with a big fat lump in your throat. Start with a profound sense of wrong, a deep homesickness, a crazy lovesickness, and run with it. If you imagine less, less will be what you undoubtedly deserve. Do what you love, and don't stop until you get what you love. Work as hard as you can. Imagine immensities. Don't compromise and don't waste time. In order to strive for a remarkable life, you have to decide that you want one. So, you can start to create a career that you love right now. Not 20 years from now, not 30 years from now, not 2 weeks from now. Now. So there you have it.
Debbie, that's absolutely beautiful. Thank you for that. And thank you so much for joining us on 1% Better.
My pleasure, Joe. Thanks for having me, and good luck with your podcast. It's really, really awesome.
That means so much from you. Thank you again, and we'll be in touch.
Okay. Thank you.